Open Book 2 Powerful Rancher TWINS took me in. I never knew my life would change like this. "You're staying in the house with us," Caleb said, his deep voice leaving no room for argument as he stood in the doorway of the bunkhouse where I'd been planning to sleep. Behind him, his twin brother Ethan leaned against the frame, arms crossed, those identical steel blue eyes watching me with an intensity that made my breath catch. I was holding my only duffel bag, still dirty from 3 days of hitchhiking, and I could feel myself trembling, not from cold but from the overwhelming realization that these two strangers were offering me something no one ever had: a place to belong. "I don't need charity," I managed to say, though my voice cracked on the last word, betraying exactly how much I needed everything they were offering. "My name is Jamie Sullivan. I'm 22 years old, and 3 months ago I was living in my car in a Walmart parking lot, trying to figure out how my life had fallen apart so completely. I'd grown up in the foster system, bouncing from home to home, never staying anywhere long enough to feel like I belonged. When I aged out at 18, I thought I'd finally be free to build the life I wanted. Instead, I discovered that freedom without resources is just another word for survival. I'd worked odd jobs, dishwasher, retail, warehouse work, whatever I could find that didn't require references or a permanent address. I'd saved every penny dreaming of going to college, of becoming something more than just another statistic. But life had other plans. A workplace injury left me unable to work for 2 months, and my meager savings evaporated paying for a shitty motel room and urgent care visits I couldn't afford. By the time I healed, I'd lost my job and my room, and suddenly I was living out of my ancient Toyota, showering at truck stops and eating from gas station discount bins. The car finally died in a small town in Montana called Silver Creek, population barely 3,000. I'd been trying to make it to the West Coast, where I'd heard there were better job opportunities, but my engine had other ideas. The mechanic took one look under the hood and quoted me a repair cost that was more than the car was worth. So there I was, stranded in the middle of nowhere with $200 to my name and no idea what to do next. That's when I saw the flyer on the community board at the general store: ranch hand needed, room and board included, hard work, good pay, apply in person at Twin Rivers Ranch. I walked the 5 miles out to the ranch with my duffel bag and my last shred of hope, following the hand-drawn map the store clerk had sketched for me. The property was massive, rolling hills dotted with cattle, white fences stretching as far as I could see, and a main house that looked like something out of a magazine. As I approached, nervous and sweating in the August heat, I saw them for the first time. Two men working in the corral, both shirtless in the afternoon sun, moving with the kind of synchronized precision that made it clear they'd been doing this together for years. They were identical twins, though I'd learn later how to tell them apart. Both stood well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the kind of muscular build that came from actual hard work, not a gym membership. Dark hair, sun-bronzed skin, and when they turned to look at me, identical steel-blue eyes that seemed to see right through every defense I'd ever built. "Help you," one of them called out, wiping sweat from his brow. His voice was deep, slightly rough, with a hint of Western drawl that made something flutter in my chest. I straightened my shoulders, trying to look more confident than I felt. "I'm here about the ranch hand position." They exchanged a glance, some silent communication passing between them. Then the one who'd spoken vaulted over the fence with easy grace and walked toward me, his twin following a step behind. Up close they were even more intimidating, not in a threatening way, but in the way that beautiful, competent people often are to those of us who have never felt like we quite measure up. "I'm Caleb Morrison," the first one said, extending a hand calloused from years of ranch work. "This is my brother Ethan. We own Twin Rivers." His handshake was firm but not crushing, and I noticed the way his eyes cataloged everything about me: my worn-out boots, my too thin frame, the desperation I was trying to hide. "Jamie Sullivan," I replied, shaking Ethan's hand next. His grip was gentler, but his gaze was just as assessing. "You got experience with ranch work?" Caleb asked, crossing his arms. I could have lied, should have lied probably, but something about the way they were looking at me made me choose honesty instead. "No, but I'm a hard worker, I learn fast, and I need this job more than I've ever needed anything in my life." The silence that followed felt endless. They looked at each other again, and I could practically see them having an entire conversation without words. Finally, Ethan spoke for the first time, his voice slightly softer than his brother's but just as commanding. "Why? Why do I need the job?" I asked, confused by the question. "No," Caleb clarified, "why should we hire someone with no experience when we could hire any of a dozen experienced ranch hands?" It was a fair question, and I didn't have a good answer. "Because those experienced ranch hands probably have other options," I said quietly. "I don't. This is it for me. And I promise you I'll work harder than anyone else because I know what it's like to have nothing. I won't take this opportunity for granted." More silent communication between them, then Caleb nodded once. "Okay, trial period, 2 weeks, you work hard, you listen, you learn, and we'll see if you're a good fit." Relief flooded through me so intensely I felt dizzy. "Thank you, you won't regret this." "We'll see," Ethan said, but there was a hint of warmth in his eyes now. "Come on, we'll show you the bunkhouse." That's when I learned the ranch had 4 other hands who lived in the bunkhouse. A separate building with shared bedrooms, a communal kitchen, and the kind of rough, masculine environment I'd expected. They were all friendly enough, welcoming me with the casual camaraderie of men who worked hard together. I thought I'd be staying there, thought I'd finally found a place where I could catch my breath and start rebuilding my life. I was wrong. After showing me around, Caleb and Ethan had excused themselves to discuss something privately. An hour later, Caleb showed up at the bunkhouse with that declaration that changed everything. "You're staying in the house with us." "The bunkhouse is fine," I protested, even as everything in me yearned to accept their offer. "I don't want to impose." "You're not imposing," Ethan said, appearing beside his brother. "The house has extra rooms and you look like you haven't had a decent night's sleep in months. Consider it part of your compensation." I wanted to argue more, but the truth was I was exhausted, bone-deep, soul-tired, exhausted. And the thought of having my own room, of not having to worry about my stuff getting stolen or someone bothering me while I slept, was too tempting to refuse. "Okay," I agreed quietly. "Thank you." And just like that, I moved into the main house at Twin Rivers Ranch, into a bedroom that was bigger than any space I'd ever called my own, with an actual bed and clean sheets and a window that overlooked the mountains. That first night, I lay awake for hours, waiting for the other shoe to drop, for there to be some catch, some price I'd have to pay for this kindness. But it never came. The twins were all business during those first few days. They woke me before dawn, put me to work feeding livestock, mending fences, mucking out stalls, all the unglamorous parts of ranch life that needed doing. My body ached in ways I didn't know were possible. My hands blistered and bled. I was so exhausted by the end of each day that I'd collapse into bed fully clothed, barely managing to kick off my boots. But I didn't complain, I couldn't. This was my chance, and I'd meant what I said about not taking it for granted. Caleb was the more demanding of the two, constantly pushing me to work harder, faster, better. He had impossibly high standards and wasn't shy about letting me know when I fell short. But I noticed he was equally hard on himself, often working twice as long as anyone else, taking on the most difficult tasks personally. Ethan was gentler in his approach, taking time to explain why we did things a certain way, offering encouragement when I got frustrated. But he was no less exacting. He just packaged his expectations in kindness. What surprised me most was how well they worked together. I'd never known twins before, and watching Caleb and Ethan operate was like watching a perfectly choreographed dance. They could communicate with just a look, anticipate each other's needs, move in perfect synchronization. It was beautiful and a little bit lonely, seeing that kind of connection and knowing I'd never experienced anything like it. By the end of the first week, I'd proven I could handle the physical work, even if I wasn't as fast or skilled as the experienced hands. But I'd also started to notice other things, things that had nothing to do with ranch work and everything to do with the way my heart would race when Caleb praised me for a job well done, or the way my skin would tingle when Ethan's hand brushed against mine reaching for the same tool. The three of us fell into a routine that felt almost domestic. We'd start the day together in the kitchen, Ethan cooking breakfast while Caleb reviewed the day's tasks and I set the table. We'd eat quickly, discussing work over coffee and eggs. Then we'd split up to handle different parts of the ranch, regrouping at lunch and again at dinner. In the evenings, we'd often end up in the living room, Caleb doing paperwork while Ethan and I watched TV or played cards, comfortable in the quiet. I learned their rhythms, their quirks, the subtle differences that let me tell them apart even when they wore the same clothes and stood the same way. Caleb had a small scar through his left eyebrow from a childhood accident. Ethan's smile came easier, reaching his eyes in a way Caleb's rarely did. Caleb was left-handed, Ethan was right-handed. Caleb took his coffee black and bitter, Ethan liked his with cream and sugar. They were two halves of a whole, and somehow, impossibly, I was starting to feel like I might have a place in their orbit. It was during the second week, on a particularly hot afternoon, that something shifted. We were working on repairing a section of fence in one of the far pastures, just the three of us since the other hands were busy with cattle. I was digging post holes, my shirt soaked through with sweat, when I misjudged the swing of the post hole digger and nearly took out Ethan's leg. He jumped back with reflexes honed from years of ranch work, but the near miss left all of us shaken. "Jesus, Jamie," Caleb snapped, his fear manifesting as anger. "You could have seriously hurt him. Pay attention." "I'm sorry," I said, my face burning with shame. "I'm sorry I wasn't." "It's fine," Ethan interrupted, his voice calm despite having just nearly been injured. "It was an accident, no harm done," but Caleb wasn't letting it go. "An accident that could have broken his leg. This isn't a game, Jamie. One moment of carelessness out here can have serious consequences." He was right and I knew it, but the way he was looking at me, disappointed and frustrated, made something crack inside my chest. I'd been trying so hard, working myself to exhaustion every day, desperate to prove I deserved to be here, and in one careless moment I'd almost ruined everything. "I know," I said quietly, setting down the post hole digger. "I'm sorry, it won't happen again." I turned and walked away before either of them could see the tears threatening to fall, heading toward the truck with some vague intention of getting water or tools or anything that would give me a moment to compose myself. I heard footsteps behind me, lighter than Caleb's heavy stride, which meant Ethan was following. Jamie, wait, I stopped but didn't turn around, furiously blinking back tears. I'd learned young that showing emotion was weakness, that tears got you nowhere in a world that didn't care. He didn't mean to come down on you so hard, Ethan said, coming to stand beside me. Caleb he worries. About me, about the ranch, about everyone who works here. It comes out as anger sometimes, but it's really just fear. I understand, I said, my voice rough. And he's right, I should have been more careful. You're learning, Ethan said gently. You've picked up in 2 weeks what takes most people months. Don't be so hard on yourself. I finally turned to look at him, and something in his expression, the kindness, the understanding, made my carefully constructed walls start to crumble. I can't afford to make mistakes, I admitted. This job, this place, it's everything to me. If I screw up and you guys decide I'm not worth keeping around, I don't know what I'll do. Understanding dawned in Ethan's eyes. Jamie, you're not going to lose this job because you almost made a mistake. Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is that you learn from them and keep trying. You don't understand, I said, the words spilling out before I could stop them. I've never had anything stable, never had anywhere that felt like it might be home. I've been here 2 weeks and it already feels more like home than anywhere I've ever lived. The thought of losing it is, I cut myself off, horrified by how much I'd revealed. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his blue eyes searching my face. Then he did something unexpected. He reached out and pulled me into a hug. It was brief, just a few seconds of his arms around me, but it shattered something inside me that I'd kept carefully protected. When was the last time someone had hugged me? I couldn't even remember. You're not losing this, he said firmly, pulling back. Not if I have anything to say about it. And neither is Caleb going to let you go, even if he's being a hard-ass about safety right now. You're part of Twin Rivers now, Jamie. We don't give up on our own. The word own settled into my chest like a warm stone, and I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. We headed back to where Caleb was still working, and he looked up as we approached, his expression softening slightly. I'm sorry I snapped at you, he said gruffly. Ethan's right, you're doing good work, just be more careful, okay? I will, I promised. And as we went back to work, I caught the twins exchanging another of those silent looks, this one lingering longer than usual, and I wondered what they were thinking. After that day, something changed in our dynamic. The twins became more protective, more attentive in ways that went beyond just employers looking out for an employee. Caleb started checking in more regularly, making sure I wasn't pushing myself too hard. Ethan began teaching me ranch skills with even more patience, taking time to explain the why behind everything. And both of them seemed to find excuses to be physically closer, a hand on my shoulder when giving instructions, standing near enough that I could feel their body heat, casual touches that made my skin tingle and my heart race. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, that they were just being friendly, that I was projecting my own growing feelings onto them. Because yes, despite my best efforts to remain professional and grateful and nothing more, I was developing feelings, for both of them. It was confusing and terrifying and completely inappropriate. They were my bosses, my benefactors, the people who'd given me a chance when no one else would. I couldn't risk everything by admitting that I thought about them constantly, that I dreamed about what it would feel like to be held by them, to be wanted by them, to be theirs in ways that had nothing to do with employment. Besides, they were clearly devoted to each other in a way that left no room for anyone else. The way they moved together, communicated without words, anticipated each other's needs. It was the kind of bond I'd read about in books but never witnessed in real life. And I was just the temporary ranch hand they'd taken pity on. I needed to remember that. But it became harder to remember as summer turned to fall and my trial period became permanent employment, became 3 months, then 4. The three of us settled into patterns that felt almost like a family. Ethan teaching me to cook in the evenings while Caleb worked on the books. Movie nights where we'd all crowd onto the big couch, arguing good-naturedly about what to watch. Early mornings where I'd find one or both of them already in the kitchen and they'd smile at me like they were glad I was there. I learned more about them during those months. Learned that their parents had died in a car accident when the twins were 25, leaving them the ranch and a mountain of debt they'd worked themselves nearly to death to pay off. Learned that Caleb blamed himself for not being there the day of the accident, even though he couldn't have known or prevented it. Learned that Ethan had dropped out of college to help run the ranch, giving up his dreams of being a veterinarian. Learned that despite their success, despite owning one of the most profitable ranches in the county, they were both profoundly lonely. We don't have much time for a social life, Ethan admitted one evening when I asked why they never seemed to go into town except for supplies. The ranch is everything. Don't you ever want more? I asked. curled up in the armchair while he and Caleb occupied the couch. More than just work, they exchanged one of their looks and something passed between them that I couldn't quite read. What would more look like? Caleb asked, his eyes finding mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. I shrugged, trying to appear casual even as my heart pounded. I don't know, friends, relationships, a life outside of Twin Rivers. We have friends, Ethan said, and we have each other, that's always been enough. But the way he said it made me think maybe it wasn't anymore, maybe something had changed for them too, and the thought both thrilled and terrified me. The shift from friendship to something more happened so gradually that I couldn't pinpoint a specific moment when everything changed. It was in the accumulation of small moments, Caleb's hand lingering on my back a second too long when he passed behind me in the kitchen, Ethan's eyes tracking my movements across a room with an intensity that felt like a physical touch, the way both of them started finding reasons to be alone with me, creating moments of intimacy that felt charged with possibility. I was feeding the horses one morning in early October when Caleb came to find me. The other hands had the day off and Ethan had gone into town for supplies, leaving the two of us alone on the ranch. "Need help?" he asked, leaning against the stall door with his arms crossed. "I've got it," I said, trying to ignore the way my pulse quickened whenever I was alone with him. "But you can keep me company if you want." He came into the stall, standing close in the confined space, and began helping with the feed distribution. We worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes before he spoke. "You've been here almost 5 months now. Has it been that long?" I asked, though I knew exactly how long it had been. I'd been counting each day like a gift. "Time flies when you're shoveling horse shit," he said with a dry humor that made me laugh. "Is that your way of saying I'm doing okay?" I teased. "More than okay," he said, his voice going serious. "You've become essential to this place, Jamie, to the ranch, too." He cut himself off, jaw tightening. "Too," I prompted, my heart racing. He turned to face me fully, and the look in his eyes made my breath stop. "To us, you've become essential to us." The air between us felt electric, charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. We were standing so close I could see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes, could smell the combination of soap and sunshine and leather that I'd come to associate with him. "Caleb," I breathed, not sure what I was asking for. His hand came up slowly, giving me time to pull away, and cupped my face with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his calloused rancher's hands. "Tell me I'm not imagining this," he said softly. "Tell me you feel it too." "I feel it," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't know what it is. I don't know if this is real or if I'm just desperate for connection and projecting onto you because you've been kind to me." "It's real," he said firmly. "And it's not just me, Ethan." He stopped, seeming to wrestle with something. "This is complicated, Jamie, more complicated than you know." "Because you're my bosses?" I asked. "Because there's a power imbalance." "That's part of it," he admitted. "But there's more. Ethan and I, we've always been enough for each other. We never thought we'd find someone who could fit into our lives, into what we are together. But then you showed up and everything changed." I was trying to process what he was saying, trying to understand the implications, when we heard the sound of a truck pulling up outside. Caleb stepped back immediately, the moment breaking like a soap bubble. "That's Ethan," he said, his voice carefully controlled again. We'll talk about this later, the three of us. You deserve to hear it from both of us." He left the stall, leaving me trembling and confused and more hopeful than I'd dared to be in my entire life. The rest of the day passed in a blur of tension and anticipation. Ethan returned with supplies, and I helped him unload while trying not to read too much into every glance, every casual touch. Caleb was quieter than usual at dinner, and I caught him and Ethan having what looked like an intense silent conversation across the table. Finally, after we'd cleaned up and I was about to retreat to my room, Ethan spoke. "Jamie, can we talk, the three of us?" My heart leapt into my throat. "Okay." We moved to the living room and I sat in the armchair while the twins took the couch, a configuration that had become familiar over the months. But tonight felt different, charged with possibility and fear in equal measure. "We owe you an explanation," Ethan began. "About us, about what we are, about what we're asking." "I didn't ask for anything," I said quickly. "That's the problem," Caleb interjected. "You've never asked for anything, Jamie. You just give and work and try to earn your place like you don't already deserve to be here, like you're not already." He looked at Ethan, some signal passing between them. "Ethan and I are more than just brothers," Ethan said carefully. "We're partners in every sense of the word, business, life, everything. We've always been enough for each other. We never thought we'd find someone who could fit into what we have together." My mind was racing, trying to understand what they were saying. "And you think We know you do," Caleb said firmly. "These past 5 months having you here, it's felt right in a way nothing ever has before, like you were always meant to be part of this, part of us. But we need to know if you feel it too, or if we're projecting our own hopes onto you." I looked between them, these two beautiful, powerful men who'd given me everything when I had nothing, and felt tears prick at my eyes. "I feel it," I admitted. "I've felt it for months, but I thought I was crazy. You're my bosses, you're twins, you clearly have something special between you. I didn't think there was room for me in that." "There's room," Ethan said softly, "if you want it, if you want us." "Both of you?" I asked, needing to be clear about what they were offering. "Both of us," Caleb confirmed. I know it's unconventional, I know it's complicated, but Ethan and we don't do anything halfway, and if you agree to this, you need to understand you wouldn't be choosing between us. You'd be choosing both of us or neither. The implications of what they were offering hit me like a physical force. They wanted me, both of them, not as their employee or their charity case, but as their partner. It was everything I dreamed of and never thought possible. I don't know how this works, I admitted. I don't have experience with relationships, let alone one with two people. Neither do we, Ethan said with a slight smile. We'd be figuring it out together, the three of us. What about the ranch hands, I asked. What about the people in town? This kind of relationship isn't exactly conventional. Let them talk, Caleb said dismissively. We've never cared much about what people think. The ranch is ours, our lives are ours, and who we choose to love is nobody's business but ours. The word love hung in the air between us, heavy with promise. Is that what this is? I asked quietly. Love, Ethan stood and crossed to kneel in front of my chair, taking my hands in his. I think it could be, I think maybe it already is and we're just now acknowledging it, but we want to give it a chance to grow, to become whatever it's meant to be, if you'll let us. I looked at Caleb, still sitting on the couch, watching us with an intensity that made my skin tingle. What do you think? I asked him. He rose and came to stand beside Ethan, both of them looking at me with identical expressions of hope and vulnerability. I think you walked into our lives 5 months ago and changed everything. I think I've been falling for you since the day you refused to give up even when the work was brutal and you were exhausted. I think Ethan's been falling for you even longer. And I think if you walk away from this, we'll respect your decision, but we'll regret not taking this chance for the rest of our lives. It was the most words I'd ever heard Caleb string together at once, and the raw honesty in them made my decision easy. I'm not walking away, I said, my voice shaking slightly. I want this, I want you, both of you. I'm terrified and I have no idea what I'm doing, but I want to try. The smiles that broke across both their faces were identical and brilliant, and then Ethan was pulling me up from the chair and into his arms, holding me like I was something precious. Over his shoulder, I saw Caleb watching us with an expression of such warmth that it made my chest ache. When Ethan finally released me, Caleb was there, his hands framing my face with that same gentleness he'd shown in the stables. Can I kiss you? He asked, and I nodded, unable to form words. The kiss was soft and careful, a question and a promise wrapped together. When we broke apart, I was trembling, overwhelmed by the intensity of everything I was feeling. Too much? Ethan asked gently, his hand on my back steadying me. No, I said, not enough, I want. I couldn't finish the sentence, but they seemed to understand. We have time, Caleb said. All the time in the world, we don't have to figure everything out tonight. Come here, Ethan said, guiding us all to the couch. We ended up in a tangle of limbs, me in the middle with Caleb on one side and Ethan on the other, their arms around me and each other, creating a cocoon of warmth and safety. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. The next few weeks were a period of adjustment and discovery. We took things slowly, learning how to be together in this new way. During the day, we still worked the ranch, maintaining professionalism around the other hands. But in the evenings, behind the closed doors of the main house, we explored what it meant to be three instead of two, to build something together that was ours alone. I learned that Caleb was surprisingly gentle despite his gruff exterior, that his hands could be tender when they weren't working. I learned that Ethan was more passionate than his calm demeanor suggested, that he felt everything deeply even when he appeared serene. I learned how they moved together, how years of being twins had created a synchronicity that now included me, pulling me into their orbit until I couldn't tell where one of us ended and the others began. We had our challenges. There were moments of jealousy when I couldn't divide my attention equally, moments of insecurity when I felt like I was intruding on something sacred between them. There were practical complications, whose room I slept in, how to balance time together and apart, how to navigate the power dynamics of them being my employers and my partners. But we talked through everything, committed to building something that worked for all three of us. The first time someone in town made a comment about the 3 confirmed bachelors out at Twin Rivers, Caleb just smiled and pulled me closer, his arm around my waist, making a clear statement that we weren't hiding anymore. The gossip spread, of course. A small town like Silver Creek didn't have much else to talk about, but the twins had been right. Most people either didn't care or kept their opinions to themselves, and the few who had problems with our relationship were people whose opinions didn't matter anyway. What surprised me most was how naturally it all felt. How easily I fit into the space between them, completing something I hadn't known was incomplete. How right it felt to wake up between them, to share coffee and conversation and comfortable silences. How the word home had transformed from an abstract concept I'd chased my whole life into this concrete reality, not a place, but these two people who'd taken me in and refused to let me go. Winter came to Montana with a vengeance, bringing snow and bitter cold and long nights that we spent huddled together by the fire. The ranch work became harder, more dangerous, but also more rewarding as we worked together to keep the cattle safe and healthy through the harsh weather. And through it all, our relationship deepened, evolved, became something stronger and more resilient than any of us had expected. It was on Christmas Eve, 6 months after that first conversation in the living room, that everything changed again. We were decorating a tree, my first real Christmas tree, a fact that had made both twins determined to make the holiday special. I was hanging ornaments while Ethan untangled lights and Caleb assembled a complicated star for the top. The radio was playing carols and snow was falling gently outside the windows, and I was overwhelmed by a sense of contentment so profound it scared me. "What's wrong?" Caleb asked, noticing my expression. "Nothing," I said, blinking back sudden tears. This is the happiest I've ever been and I keep waiting for something to ruin it." "Nothing's going to ruin it," Ethan said firmly, crossing to pull me into his arms. "We're not going anywhere, Jamie. This is forever if you want it to be." "Is that a proposal?" I asked, trying to make it a joke even though my heart was racing. "What if it is?" Caleb said, setting down the star and coming to join us. "What if we're saying we want you here permanently, not just as our partner but as our family? What if we're asking you to build a life with us, to make this official in whatever way we can?" I looked between them, these two men who'd saved me in every way a person can be saved, and felt something settle into place in my chest. "Yes," I said simply. "Whatever you're asking, the answer is yes." That night in the bedroom we'd started sharing, they showed me exactly what forever meant. Their touches were reverent, worshipful, mapping every inch of my skin like they were memorizing me. And when we finally came together, all three of us tangled in sheets and moonlight, it felt like a promise being sealed, a vow more binding than any words could be. Afterward, lying between them with their arms around me and their heartbeats steady against my skin, I finally understood what home was. It wasn't a place, it was this. These two people, this love we'd built together, this belonging that no one could ever take away. Spring came, bringing new life to the ranch and new possibilities to our relationship. We made it legal in the ways we could. I officially became part owner of Twin Rivers Ranch, my name added to the deed alongside theirs. We had a commitment ceremony with just the three of us and the ranch hands who'd become like family, exchanging rings and vows under the Montana sky. And we started making plans for the future, expanding the ranch, maybe fostering kids from the system who needed what I'd needed, building something that would outlast all of us. The other ranch hands eventually became our closest friends and strongest supporters. What could have been awkward instead became natural. They saw how the three of us worked together, how we complemented each other, and they accepted it because it made sense in a way that didn't need explaining. We were better together than we could ever be apart, and that was enough. I thought often about that first day, standing in the August heat with my duffel bag and my desperation, looking at two strangers and hoping they'd give me a chance. I thought about how terrified I'd been, how certain that any moment they'd realize I wasn't worth their kindness and send me away. I thought about all the times I'd almost given up, almost run, almost convinced myself I didn't deserve the happiness they were offering. And I was grateful I'd stayed, grateful I'd trusted them. Grateful I'd chosen to believe that maybe, just maybe, I deserved something good. Now standing on the porch of the house that had become my home, watching Caleb and Ethan work with the horses in the corral, I felt nothing but peace. They looked up simultaneously as they often did and smiled at me with identical expressions of love and belonging. And I smiled back knowing that this ranch, these men, this life was mine. Not because I'd earned it or deserved it or fought for it, but because they'd chosen me just as much as I.